Hello, and welcome to the candidate interviews for the 2015 municipal election. This is brought to you by Citizens for Environmental Balance and taped here in Newburyport's community studio, PortMedia, located on Graff Road. Citizens for Environmental Balance, or CEB, is a grassroots volunteer citizens group dedicated to ensuring that the people's voice is heard during public debate regarding the important issues that will have a long-term impact on the quality of our community's environment and our children's future. One of our mission goals is to present factual information so that informed decisions can be made regarding the future of the community. Citizens for Environmental Balance has, for a number of local elections, run candidate interviews. This is a series of one-on-one interviews with candidates for the City Council positions. All candidates have been invited to participate to air their stance on issues and to present themselves to us, the citizens of Newburyport. Each candidate has been given a list of questions 48 hours in advance of his or her interviews in order to prepare. Each candidate shall be asked the same questions. Follow-up questions will be asked as needed, and these will vary. I'm Dennis Chambers. I'm a resident of Federal Street and a registered voter here in the city, and I have essentially formulated these 10 questions. Each candidate's interview will air on the local access channels throughout the remainder of the season. In addition, the interviews will be posted on the internet for those without cable. May the voters be informed. Hello, I'm Dennis Chambers on behalf of Citizens Environmental Balance. We're here today talking with Ed Cameron, who is running for City Council at large. Ed, welcome to our discussion.
Nice to see you, Dennis. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you for being here. Before we launch into a series of questions, I'd like to, if you would, take a minute or two and tell us a little bit about yourself for those who don't know you and anything you think it's important for us to know.
Great, thank you. Yeah, again, I'm Ed Cameron, and I've been on the Newburyport City Council for now my 4th term. I first ran in 2007, and some of the issues I was mostly concerned about back then are still some of the issues that unfortunately are with us now. Some of the things that I've been working on over time, certainly education, fiscal responsibility, the waterfront, which is still something we're grappling with these days. I live on Oakland Street with my wife Suzanne and our daughters Anna and Lucy. I've been here since 2002. I'm not from Newburyport originally, but I am from Massachusetts. I've always hated the Yankees and loved the Red Sox, but I'm not a townie per se. But I've really learned a lot by being on the council. I think I've added in many places. What I do in my day job is I work at Community Teamwork in Lowell. We're a community action agency. We work with low-income people. I oversee the division that provides housing and homeless services, so I have about 70 staff that I oversee, and we provide housing for thousands of families, homeless families included, as well as shelter in the Merrimack Valley. And so I think that kind of work, helping people during the day, corresponds very well with what I'm trying to do as a city councilor. Again, very pleased to be here. Thank you to Citizens for Environmental Balance for having us.
Pleasure to have you here. Let's jump right into the big one. One of the big ones, New England Development is coming into town. They're here already. They've been here for quite a while. They're having more of a presence, evidently. Mr. Karp has a few dollars to throw around. So what is your take on the whole NED?
Yeah, New England Development is obviously, they're the big kahuna, the big elephant in the room in terms of downtown and how we're going to handle that. I've been somebody who's been in favor of an open waterfront, more park, less parking down there, but it's always been about what's going to happen around the edges. So New England Development owns the so-called Waterfront West, so that's the Michaels to the Black Cow area, and also the other side on the east side, which is Oldies. And you know, there have been different redevelopment schemes over the years. A lot of that was before my time, so I'm aware that there's a lot of a lot of old animosities and fears. And I think where we're at today is, it would be great to have more transparency from New England Development about what they want to do. I think there are certain zoning controls in place with Waterfront West that say that they need to provide their own parking. I think that's an important piece that we need to keep in mind. We're looking certainly for cooperation on a parking garage. Titcomb Street was identified several years ago by the City Council as a good area for that garage. We have some federal and state money that we can work with. That Fitness Factory area is owned by New England Development, so whatever the horse trading is, either for the price of the land or in exchange for parking spaces, I think we need to make sure that that works as well as it can for Newburyport, not just for New England Development. I do not want to see city resources, state resources, federal resources going to build a parking garage for a fairly wealthy company that can do quite well on its own. So I think there's certainly a stakeholder that we need to pay attention to, but we need to be cautious. They're a very high quality, high-end developer. We're a little part of their whole empire, but they do own about 40% of downtown and some of the best locations, and you wouldn't know it until you look at the assessor's map. But they exert a great degree of control over the properties that they own, and I think we need to be strong and advocate for the best deals that we can for whatever happens down the road.
You mentioned the waterfront. Let's move right into it and get a little bit more granular, if we may.
Sure.
You said that there are some old animosities. I've been around a little longer than you in town, not much longer, but there are old fights that people have fought.
Sure.
However, we have a lot of new families moving into
Yes.
town as well. Do you think the fact that we have so many newcomers who are building and adding to the city, does that ease the issue about the waterfront? Does it make it more?
I think it helps. I know, I was somebody who moved here in 2002. I'd lived in Boston for a while, and my wife owned a place in the South End. So when I moved, one of the first things you notice is it's an incredible downtown. High Street's amazing, Plum Island. There's so many incredible places here in Newburyport, but that the waterfront dirt lots just seemed very kind of out of character. As I've learned over the years, and I've become very friendly with a lot of the real characters, I would say, of the waterfront. So Bill Harris is somebody I really look up to and respect his opinion. Jim Roy is also somebody that I've learned a lot about the waterfront. I have good relations with the members of COW, and I'm considered a member of COW.
COW being what?
COW being Citizens for an Open Waterfront. And I'm also very friendly, on a personal level and a professional level with members of the NRA and the Waterfront Trust.
The NRA being?
Newburyport Redevelopment Authority. And, I think we're all, local people. A lot of us are doing this volunteer and just trying to make the best decisions we can. So when I ran in 2007, it was really park versus parking. And I am always been on the more park side. Then when New England Development wasn't going to be building anything during the so-called Great Recession, the NRA looked at some ideas about developing some private buildings and structures there. Originally I thought that might be a good idea because nothing else was happening down there. But gradually, when you listen to people, there was some interest in that in the beginning. But I think overwhelmingly people want more park and they don't want buildings there. So it's figuring out how to make all that happen, and obviously the big factor is how do you pay for it? So right now the City Council has an ad hoc committee that's chaired by Jared Eigerman, and we have the Waterfront Trust and NRA, Harbor Commission, as well as COW, and Bill Harris represents the settlers. They're the folks that were involved in a lawsuit with the city and the NRA many years ago. So we're just trying to kind of get to basics and plot out what the vision is and a roadmap to get there. I hope we can be successful. I think the fact that we have the possibility of a garage is really, that was the big roadblock. The next roadblock will be the design and the money. But I think until we can get parking off of the dirt lots and then turn those into parkland in some way, shape, or form, that's how we're going to get this accomplished.
So a step at a time is how you see it?
One step at a time is definitely the way it's going to happen.
Speaking about how we're going to pay for it, what's your take on the taxpayers in the city? Are they being taxed enough? Are they too much? Is it just right? Is it a Goldilocks situation?
Oh yeah, that's a great way to put it. No, I think we all feel overtaxed. I mean, let's face it. Property tax is a very unfair way to tax and to raise revenue in some ways. My examples are always, and especially around election time when you're knocking on doors and you run into folks that are living on a fixed income. They may have been in the home 30, 40, 50 years or since they were born. They're barely hanging on. They're living on Social Security and pension, retirement benefits, and for them, if they're in a $500,000 home in the South End,
it's now a $500,000.
It's now a $500,000 home. Years ago,
Right.
it would have been affordable. The taxes on that are really onerous for people. So I've always supported anything we can do to provide tax breaks for seniors and veterans, and there are some state allowances that allow us to do that. But yeah, it's a challenge. I don't foresee us or myself supporting anything more than the 2.5% increase that we've been doing. We're allowed to do under state law without a vote of the community. The last couple of years, we've been able to not raise the taxes up to the full 2.5% to try to provide some relief, and particularly that was because of water and sewer rates, because we had, we've redone our water plant. We fixed the water in the wastewater treatment plant, other than we need to deal with the odor piece. So those have been those are fees that we as water and sewer ratepayers are paying. So the thought was to try to provide a little bit of a break. Same time, schools are seeking additional resources. And again, back in the 2000s, we cut a number of teaching positions. Arts, athletics have been curtailed. Fees have risen. Foreign language in the schools is an issue that a lot of parents, including myself, are concerned about. So it's trying to find that balance. So, to answer your question, maybe it's the Goldilocks. I mean, I think where we're taxed is it's high, but I think it's an amount that's able to provide us with decent public services. So I think, but I'm not looking to raise them any more than what they're at right now. We've got to find other sources of revenue.
You walked us briefly past the sewer. Let's go back to it.
Yeah, you can find the path to the sewer plant by smell. You don't have to open your eyes or follow directions. And it's been unfortunate. We spent over $28 million refurbishing that plant. That plant really was on its last legs. We were able to take advantage of some state incentives and some federal money. This was during the so-called ARA, American Reinvestment Recovery Act. We were able to get a couple of $1 million out of that. So we redid our plant. Some people said, well, we should move this completely away and move it upriver. And
somebody else's backyard.
Somebody else's backyard. That'd be great because that is a great spot. And obviously it's in a very residential area by the river down there on Water Street. But to move it upriver would have been $40 million instead of 28. And that just wasn't going to happen. So overall, there was a slight increase in the cost of that refurbishment of the wastewater treatment plant. We were never told it was going to completely eliminate the odor issue, but I remember asking several times, and I've got stacks of papers in my basement from all the meetings that we attended on it, that the odor control was going to get better. I'm disappointed that it did not get better. Some of the residents are saying that it has gotten worse. It's kind of hard to really quantify that, but certainly that's a big complaint we hear from residents. And we're going to have a meeting on this coming Monday night to look at a possible solution. There's, of course, it has a pretty hefty price tag to it, so we got to, I think kick the tires on that. Maybe we get a second opinion. We had a consulting firm come in and take a look at that, but it really is unacceptable. It's inexcusable that we are subjecting the residents of the South End to those odors, and I want to be a part of getting that to a better place.
You've had a lot of experience with the Newburyport city budget. Mm-hmm. The council has, I would say, minimal input into it, but nonetheless critical. Would you give us some of that?
Yeah, so our role, our role on the council, one of our big three things, we appoint people, we create legislation through ordinances and orders, but the really big thing is with the budget. And I disagree a little bit that the council doesn't have a lot to do with it. We do have quite a bit of power that time of year because we need to approve the whole thing. Where we are a little bit limited, and I think what you were alluding to, is we can't add items to that, so we cannot increase it, and that's a part of state law that I think needs to be looked at. Obviously, in the Massachusetts State House and on the federal level, it's the legislative branch that's coming up with the original budget, and that's what gets voted on eventually. And a president, a governor can veto certain items, but it's a little different here. But I have to say, I've been on Budget and Finance Committee all 8 years I've been on the council. I've chaired it, I think 4 years. I have a pretty in-depth, handle on the budget. It's pretty complicated. We're really running a small business here with, hundreds of employees, over a $50 million budget. And government really does the things that no private sector business would dream of doing because there's no money in it. Getting funding for libraries, police, fire, it's really kind of almost like a shared insurance. We're all kind of pitching in order to get this coverage, through police and fire that hopefully we'll never use, but otherwise, there's no way to privatize these things. And I think schools are certainly one of the valid, local functions that we need to be strongly supporting. That consumes over half of our budget, so that's really the big piece there. But we drill department heads every year. We'll have a series of workshops. From time to time, there have been cuts proposed, particularly in the 2009 era. We had a very tight budget. We were going to cut some staffing at the library and kind of have some cuts there. We're going to cut the fire department by a couple of positions. And one thing that I'll never forget is the most pushback was from citizens concerned about the library. People really value the Newburyport Public Library. We had improved it a number of years ago and have a great building there. So I think people really value the services. Anytime we've tried to cut something, when we nickel and dime the parks or police and fire or certainly the schools, I mean, there's always a lot of pushback. So I think we've got the minimal level of services. I absolutely think we should be spending more money if we can find it on the schools, on parks, and streets and sidewalks. But it's a tight budget, and our ability to raise money is pretty limited.
How are the schools doing in your view?
I think the schools are good. Various rankings in terms of MCAS scores, kids going on to college, and sort of these arbitrary rankings from places like Boston Magazine. I mean, I think we do pretty well. Newburyport's got a pretty educated population. I think a significant number of our residents are college educated. I think that means that kids at home hopefully are getting the supports they need at home. And I think when they're in our schools, I think they're getting a good education. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I think we've got some places, we need to support music and arts and foreign language at an earlier age. But I think we've been able to hold our own. A lot of the responsibility for all of this relies on the school committee. We've got some new folks that are looking to get involved, which I think is great. Some of the school committee members that are looking to run for re-election have a lot of experience, a lot of insight. I think we'll have a good school committee in the next term. Our school superintendent is doing a good job, had good reviews in her evaluation process, so I think hopefully she'll be here for the long term. I often joke if I could come back in the next life, come back as a school superintendent, because they all seem to come and stay for a couple of years and then go on to a job and make even more money. But she seems great, and I think that's something that, if we can have some longevity there, I think that'll give us some consistency. I do know, and I will say though, I think there's interest on the council, current council members, to learn a little bit more about the school budget. We do get pretty detailed reporting. But when we approve our overall city budget in June, we're just approving a number for the schools. We don't get into the details. And I'm not saying we should get into the details, but I think we want to find a way to be involved with the school committee and the school administration as they're developing that budget, so we have a better understanding. Last year, there was thought that the mayor was going to try to add some additional funds, and it wasn't exactly what the school department and the school committee were hoping for, so there was some pushback trying to figure out how that is, get settled. So we were looking at different budget documents on the schools throughout the budget process. It kept changing. It was a bit of a moving target, so I think we'd like to improve that process ongoing. Do
you see the school committee as equal in rank to the city council? I know this committee is elected as well.
Yes, I do. They get paid a little bit less. We actually get paid. I'll never forget my wife yelling upstairs in 2007 saying, hey, if you win, you're going to get paid $5,000 a year. I thought it was a free thing, but city councilors do get paid $5,000 a year. School committees a little bit less, but yeah, I think they're equal partners in this. Again, they're in a much more detailed way than the council is for the rest of the budget. The school committee is responsible for the school budget with the superintendent, and again, it's one of the most primary functions that we have at the local level. So I absolutely think it's an incredibly important and valued partner in city government. If you've ever been to or watched some of the meetings, they're very good people because they really get into the weeds. Long meetings, and they have to put in a lot of work. They have a lot of subcommittees as well, so I think they do a good job, and we're well served by the people that we've had on there.
I think sometimes we regular taxpayers and citizens don't really come to appreciate the amount of work that goes into all of these. Yeah. Position.
It's a lot. It's a lot of meetings. You get a lot of input. You get input at Market Basket. When you're pumping gas. You hear it everywhere. And sometimes it's helpful, positive feedback. Sometimes it's a little less than positive. But yeah, it is. It's time consuming. And as a counselor, when I'm driving around, I notice potholes, I notice cracked sidewalks, I noticed
one last night driving home.
Well, you tell me where it is and I'll call it in. Dead animals, some of my favorite calls are calling the health director, and I know it's Sunday morning, but there's something on Forester Street, and can you call the animal control officer and have them clean it up? So it does kind of it does take a lot of time, but it's really interesting, and I think it's an important part for people. I hope more people get involved.
Let's move into deeper waters with the sidewalks.
Mm-hmm. When I started on the council, definitely was an issue. I heard about knocking on doors the first time back in 2007. When I was first on, our budget for sidewalks was $30,000. There was some phraseology in the ordinances that we had to spend a minimum of $30,000, and that's what we were putting in from the city. A year later, we increased that to $60,000, and then when we implemented paid parking, we were able to add $200,000. We put some language in there, and some people wanted the paid parking revenue to go to the general fund. Some wanted it focused on downtown, but we worked out an arrangement where it was the meals tax that was going to towards sidewalks. So that added another $200,000. We also get what is known as Chapter 90 funds from the state. We get those every year, and that's how we actually pay for the bulk of our street and sidewalk work. It's never enough. There's always a lot of arguments between the councilors and the mayor about which streets are going to get fixed. There's many that, one thing about being a councilor, in 2007, there were certain streets that were really in rough shape, and now some of those streets have been fixed, but then there are others that, streets deteriorate quite a bit over time, and sidewalks as well with tree roots, and we had a history of putting trees with big gnarly roots on sidewalks, and that's a big part of our problem. So we're hopeful that the state's going to be providing more money. They're looking to increase that. That used to be a $200 million a year statewide. Now that's looking like that's going to be $300 million. Hopefully we'll get our fair share of that. We're working to improve sidewalk design. So in the past, if a private contractor or a resident wanted to fix the sidewalk and hire somebody, the city would cooperate by clearing out the old asphalt, but then the private person would pay, but it was all kind of done differently. And so we've got consistent design standards. Councilor Eigerman has proposed a sidewalk ordinance that kind of specifies where brick would be, where concrete would be allowed. We definitely want to get away from asphalt. So I think that'll be important. And what I'm looking for also in there as a next step is creation of some sort of citizen mechanism to get feedback on to sidewalk inventory, so we know which ones need to be fixed. I think we need a capital improvement plan for sidewalks. So literally that would be a list of every street and sidewalk. In streets where we don't have sidewalks, I know a lot of folks are interested in Hale Street, to have at least one side of that, so you can walk from the Turkey Hill area towards downtown. Noble Street, which is a cut through from Ferry Road to Story Ave, that's in need of repair. So figuring out the ones that would get a lot of traffic, because our money's going to be limited here. If somebody once told me if we wanted to do every sidewalk over, it'd be $20 million for the whole city. We don't have that kind of money. So I think it's really prioritizing, but getting an inventory, and I don't know if that involves getting teams of citizens out there under our highway department's supervision and just going and simply doing an inventory. I know the city and volunteers did that with trees a couple of years ago. So I think that would be a good way to just to make it more systematic. Right now I think it's kind of random. The squeaky wheel gets the grease and those sidewalks get fixed, but I think we need a more systematic plan.
For me, it's kind of like when I'm working on my house and I fix this and I fix that, and then the next thing is more obvious, right? Okay, I really have to do that project next. So
I think it is like home improvement projects. I mean, you try to get it on paper, and well, last year we didn't really think this was that bad, but well, now it is.
Now it is.
And it's Merrimack Street's another place where it's just really tough. If you're in a wheelchair or pushing a kid in a stroller, it's very tough.
Yeah. We've been getting pretty nitty-gritty here. Let's back up and, while we wrap up our time together, talk a little bit more philosophically about historic preservation. Newburyport is one of the great historic cities in America, in my view. And I'm wondering what your overall sense of that is.
It is. It's a really incredibly vibrant and beautiful community. I grew up on the South Shore, a little bit south of Boston, so my first couple of times here I was pretty blown away when you drive in on High Street and you get to downtown. And you know, I remember the first time seeing the Fowles sign that's at 17 State Street, and you know, I've always liked neon, and that was a really cool you know, signpost about what Newburyport's all about. So you know, where government and local regulation get into that, I mean, we've always been very hands-off on that, and many people said a few years ago, well, it's so incredible now and it's been really well preserved. Why do we need anything? You know, let's just let things ride. And you know, there's a certain logic to that, but I think a part of the reason why Newburyport is so well preserved is there was a real influx of federal money and private investment back in the late 60s and 70s. So that's why it wasn't all flattened downtown and turned into parking lots and strip malls, is because the Newburyport Redevelopment Authority, using federal money but also leveraging private investment.
And the industrial park, right?
Industrial park definitely contributed to the revenue, and I was actually driving out there with a friend a lot today, Art Courier, showing me around out in the business park, which is what we're calling it now. And
of course,
that was you know, that, so though, you know, all of that, you know, has helped sustain Newburyport. So we're at a place now, I think in the last 10 years, you know, before the Great Recession, where we're seeing some teardowns and, you know, developers, and there's some really good ones around town that, you know, they will try to rehabilitate a building and preserve the historic architecture. If a building needs to come down, there are builders and architects who will build something that is in keeping with the rest of the neighborhood. But we've seen an erosion, and so buildings that were built before 1930, Bill Harris will give you a long list of the ones that we've lost. And a couple of years ago, there was a local historic district study committee. They worked for 5 years, came back with you know, I think a very ambitious plan. I think in hindsight, we should have started smaller and tried to build up. Sometimes I think it's good to go big. Sometimes I think it's better to start incremental. And I think you know, this became very controversial. You know, I think a lot of, you know, hard feelings on all sides. I think, you know, what was apparent that whether you were in favor of the local historic district or not, people did really care about the history and the structures and how that makes this such an incredible place to be. So that did not pass. That was, I think, in 2011 or so. And in this current term, we've really been fortunate to have Jared Eigerman on the council, so he represents Ward 2. He's got a background in land use as an attorney, so he really knows this stuff, whereas for your average layperson like me, I mean, it's kind of a tough slog to understand all the zoning and all the architectural implications and how this all works in real life. He made a couple of proposals. One was for a demolition control overlay district. So, you know, a pretty broad expanse, and all it said is, you know, it was just made it tougher for developers and private owners just to tear down a building, that you would need to jump through a few hoops before that happened, and that the local authorities would be able to stop that. Instead of we have had a demolition delay, so the Historic Commission could stop a demolition for a year, but after the year was over, you know, the developer could tear it down, and that has happened. In many cases, there was just one on Toppin's Lane that was torn down because they got in under that delay, before that delay ordinance was changed. So the demolition control was passed unanimously. I think that was, you know, people from all sides really thought that was a good idea. And we've got also now more control over downtown, so there was a downtown overlay district. In some ways similar, in some ways to the historic district, local historic district, but different in some ways. Either the planning board or the ZBA or the controlling authorities there instead of the Historic Commission, and that seemed to please some people. But we've got some controls in, so I think that's good. Whether we need anything down the road, I've not heard any pushes on anything. I think we're at a very busy time development-wise. I think we need to be very careful about infill. I know in my own neighborhood on Oakland Street, we've got a couple of projects that are going underway where you know, a new structure is going to be put up, and you know, the neighbors seem to like that, and that's going to look okay. Another small house, probably from the 1850s, was purchased, and that's being rehabbed. So I think having the demolition control, otherwise I think it would have been very easy just to tear that little house down and build something bigger there, but they're rehabbing it. It's going to be terrific. They're extending it in the back, but in the front it's going to look good and same as it has. So it's trying to balance all of those competing forces. You know, we need some development. We want people to improve their homes, but we want to be careful about just, you know, when you destroy something, it's gone forever. And again, I think that's really a unique factor in Newburyport's quality of life.
For anybody who's a newcomer watching this, could you explain infill for us?
Yeah, I didn't know what infill was when I first moved here, really what that is developers will look for places where they might be able to squeeze in an extra building. Sometimes that's splitting one lot and creating a whole different lot and a new structure there. Sometimes it's adding a large addition on. Sometimes that's good. I think our ZBA does a decent job in some ways, and in other respects, its hands are kind of tied. So, you know, there are various examples that people will point to that, you know, either it's too big or it really changes the character of a neighborhood. I know one that was recently quite controversial is at 77 Lime Street, and again, to get that approved, instead of creating two separate buildings, which probably would have looked nice on this one lot, they had to attach them in some way, and the way it was attached is kind of through a breezeway. It just does not look like the rest. And you know, I say that as somebody who I'm cognizant that real people either move in and buy that, or they live in Newburyport and they buy that, and I'm not one to point fingers. But I think clearly that was not, you know, it doesn't look that good. So another ordinance, again, Councilor Eigerman, that, you know, was overwhelmingly approved by the council. We had pretty much everyone at public comment in favor of that. And it created a little more definition about how you could build something new and make sure that it looked good, instead of creating one of these phony little breezeways and then calling it one structure when it was just a little, literally like a you know, little connector there that was just clearly to get around the zoning.
If you could wrap up our time together with
Sure.
a minute and a half of what you'd like to say about your candidacy and what
Sure.
your dreams are for the future, possibly.
My dreams are for the future, thank you. Well, I'm hoping to enjoy a nice Saturday afternoon when I get out here. I'll do a little bit of campaigning, but thank you, and again, thanks to Citizens for Environmental Balance. So I'm running for what would be my 5th term. I find that hard to believe because it's gone really fast. But I've really enjoyed my time on the council. I think I've provided some value. I'm not afraid to stick my neck out when there's something I think that needs to be done. I've been really very concerned about historic preservation, supporting the schools, finding new revenue streams. I was the one, and I was the only one the first time I proposed this, to have the local meals tax. So this is a way for us to increase our revenue on the local side by $400,000. We added a tiny bit to the local meals tax, and I think that's been helpful with downtown and adding to the general revenue of the city. So I'm asking people to support me, and I would appreciate your vote on Tuesday, November 3rd. It's coming up quick. I'm one of the candidates that's seeking one of the 5 at-large council positions. There are 9 candidates in total. There'll be a couple of debates coming up, which I hope people will either show up to over the next couple of weeks, and look forward to meeting you if I haven't, seeing you again if I've met you over the years, and would appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
Thanks,
Thank
Dennis.
you for your time.
Great, thanks.